Well, hello, Bob Friday. Thanks for sitting with me today for this episode number 3 of Under the AP. We're here at the WLPC conference in Phoenix, which has been a blast so far. I don't know if you've been enjoying it, but
one of my favorite conferences.
It is. So. And you just got here yesterday, is that right? You weren't here for boot camps, is that?
I got here Monday, but I wasn't here for the boot camp.
Gotcha. Well, good. Yeah, lots of fun stuff planned ahead for us here at the conference. I'm looking forward to it. So, Bob, I mentioned to you that the point of this podcast that I'm doing is really to get to know the other professionals in our industry, and Wi-Fi professionals, right? I think when I say the name Bob Friday, people probably have heard that name before, if they've been in the industry.
In the wireless space.
In the wireless space for any amount of time. You have a long history in this wireless space. But before I kind of dive into some of questions around what you've been doing, I wanted to mention in my previous role I worked at a company called Theatro. I was the wireless architect.
I met you guys at Cisco. How long were you there?
I was there since I was like employee number 8. I didn't meet you. I'm sure you met with like the CTO and the CEO. Chris Todd and Ravi Kumar. But anyway, I remember, it must have been a couple of years ago because I was still with Theatro at the time, you actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, I see you're working at Theatro, what's going on? I met some of your guys previously, and that was really cool to me. That, here's Bob Friday, well-known individual, reaching out to Todd Smith, I'm not super social, so I'm not out there amongst a lot of people, but you were curious enough to reach out to someone else in the industry you didn't know and just ask how things were going. So I thought that was really neat. That really wow, Bob Friday. I told my wife, Bob Friday, this guy, who's been around in Wi-Fi forever, reached out of the blue.
I always thought Theatro was a cool thought, and I was just at NRF last couple weeks ago, right? Theatro has a big booth there now, so they've gone from kind of this little small startup to, doing the Vocera of retail type of thing. Exactly.
I'm very excited for them. Still have great relationships at Theatro, even though I'm no longer there right now. But anyway, I wanted to mention that because that made my day when you reached out today. So thank you. All right. So Bob Friday. I remember not necessarily your involvement, but the impact of what you've done with Wi-Fi really played an impact on my career going back about 2003, 2004 time frame.
Back during the aerospace, Aruba, trapeze, and all the Wi-Fi was just becoming a big thing in the industry.
Exactly. And I remember, and I'll ask you a bit more about this, but this was when you were at the time, I don't remember if Cisco had acquired aerospace yet.
Cisco acquired aerospace in 2005-06, started in 2001.
All right. And you guys at Aerospace were responsible really for the whole idea of a controller, kind of controlling, configuring access points. Is that accurate?
Well, I would say there was probably at the same time frame, right? Because back then we had Aruba, trapeze, actually Symbol, when we actually started Aerospace, we were going to do the wireless controller, and Symbol actually announced the wireless controller. And so we thought, hey, game over with, boats left and everything, but then we found out there's a difference between marketing and execution. You can announce a lot of things, but you still have to execute and deliver.
Sure.
And so that one, I would say the race was on for those who remember back in those days.
Well, I was working at a company called Wavelink at the time. The product that I was working on was kind of a vendor agnostic software that allowed you to configure, manage access points, from the various vendors at the time, rather than having to go and connect manually and autonomously, individually configure every single AP. And so this is kind of the precursor to what controllers would do, right? And as soon as, Aerospace, Cisco, you also mentioned Aruba, as soon as they came out with these controller-based, wireless networks, that ended that product for us. Like it was maybe 2 or 3 years later. Like, all right, we're no longer in that space anymore because everyone's got controllers now. So that kind of impacted my career a bit and caused some movement.
I don't know if you remember AeroNet.
Yeah.
I mean, Cisco, that was probably the autonomous AP, right? Everything got started, all these autonomous APs.
Right.
You know, and eventually these networks got big enough where trying to manage autonomous AP with scripts got out of hand. That's when kind of the, you know, what I call the cellular architecture, right? Because at the time, you know, before this, I'd actually done a company called Metricom Ricochet, which was kind of a wireless mesh SP company.
Okay.
And so if you look at the controllers, it kind of looks like an SP architecture back in those days. Base station controllers, you know, we're taking data planes.
So is that where you kind of got the idea of doing more, you know, the whole idea of controller based, you know, Wi-Fi and controlling all those access points that are out there? Is that kind of where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, before aerospace, I'd been doing this Metricom Ricochet thing, which was the vision of, you know, we were going to deploy, you know, Metricom Ricochet was the vision of we're going to deploy wireless data, this even before cellular and everything. You know, that was a great thought.
Yeah.
It was a better thought with the iPhone. But, you know, as part of that adventure, we were building technology, and a service writer thing, you know, and when we saw what was happening, that's even before Wi-Fi, but we saw what's happening in enterprises. Enterprises are being asked to take care of hundreds of radios, if not thousands of radios, tens of thousands of users. To some extent, to me, they look like service writers. Okay, now the enterprises are being asked to be small super service writers. So that was kind of the similarity between my Metricom Ricochet adventure.
Okay.
And, hey guys, there's a problem here that looks a little bit like what we've been working on.
So tell me a bit when you were, you know, at the aerospace and that was coming along. You know, you guys were getting a lot of traction at the time, and Cisco reached out. You know, tell me a bit about, you know, you guys talking to Cisco, the whole excitement of we might get acquired. I mean, how did all that go for you guys who were like the ones who started aerospace?
You know, my memory back then, if you think about it, was probably the biggest thing, like with any emerging technology, was when Intel put Wi-Fi. I don't know if you remember Citrino putting Wi-Fi into a laptop.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the kind of the catalyst that kind of got Wi-Fi to go from this nice to have to a must have in the enterprise, right? And whether it was Aruba, and I think, you know, back then it probably became an Aruba, a two-horse race between Aruba and airspace. And to be honest, I think, you know, you have to get the story from the others, from Kurdi at Aruba, but
Sure.
I think everyone thought that Cisco was going to acquire Aruba.
I had not heard that before.
They had the inside track and everything.
Wow.
And so we got called in on one Saturday. Something must have happened. And, they called us up and said, "Hey, we'd like you to come in." It kind of went very quickly from a weekend trip to Cisco to joining the Cisco adventure.
Nice. So how long did that take before that initial phone call that, hey, come down here till?
It was probably, you know, within 1 or 2 months between initial discussions to,
Wow.
you know, now Cisco had talked to us earlier, you know, pinged us earlier, but by the time we engaged, it was a pretty quick negotiation.
So that must have been very fun and exciting for you guys, because at the time, I mean, Cisco, you know, was much like they are today, but to a lesser extent. I mean, they were networking. They kind of are in a lot of ways synonymous with networking, but especially back then, right? There was less competition in that space, and they were kind of acquiring more companies to build up that market share. But that must have been really fun and exciting to go through that kind of acquisition process.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's acquisition, you know, as I tell you, where you're doing companies and startups, you know, the initial couple of years are all about product innovation, getting product development built. But the bigger part of the thing is around scaling the business. And that's always hard for any small company because you got to raise money, build sales team. You know, so joining Cisco was basically you had an instant sales team, right? You know, you didn't have to go build a sales team. And that's, you know, from there, the business started scaling very fast.
Sure.
Right? Because, you know, Cisco is a sales machine.
Yeah.
You know, you put something, you know, you put a good product in
And
the machine.
Wi-Fi at that point was really starting to take off, like you mentioned, with Intel putting, you know, the Wi-Fi into the chipset and everything. And then, you know, a lot of handhelds started coming out around then too, and so timing was perfect. It seemed
timing would, you know, that's the other, you know, key to success is market timing is a critical part, and especially with emerging technologies. You know, if you look what happened at aerospace, that was a that was an emerging technology, and that's market timing and catalyst things.
Yeah.
You know, you look what I'm doing with Mist right now. This is a much more disruptive architectural story versus what we did with aerospace.
Right. Well, we'll get to Mist here in a minute, but I want to. So now you're with Cisco, and you're kind of, if I understand correctly, you were kind of now in charge of like the direction of what Cisco was going to do in that wireless, that Wi-Fi space, right? Is that accurate?
I found, you know, I found a couple things when I got to a big company. You know, my first experience at a big company was some product manager told me they were going to delay something for 2 quarters. HR told me I overreacted. So it took me a little time to appreciate the fact that, you know, once you're in a big company that, you know, they have plenty of money. They're not worried about running out of money.
And they have their way of doing things, right?
It's like, you know, 2 quarters, you know, I'd always been in startup land before, so this is my first big company experience. And in startup land, you know, if you have a year's worth of money in the bank, you're doing good. You know, so the concept of delaying anything half a year was
and you're used to innovating, pushing fast, making whatever you have to do, you just did it, right? That's the startup. I kind of had a little bit of a transition going from Theatro startup for 8 years to Comcast Business, large organization, because just the way things are done is just a lot different.
Yeah,
so yeah,
it take a month to get a meeting, right? It takes a while to get things.
I totally get that. So you're kind of driving things at Cisco now from that whole wireless perspective.
Well, I would say when I was at Cisco, I was mobility CTO. And,
okay.
And I would say, you know, at a big company, I started playing the role more around industry innovation, you know, like Hotspot 2.0,
right? Yeah.
CMX, indoor location. So that's what I found in big companies, and maybe strategic alliances and acquisitions, right? I don't know if you remember Cognio, Navini.
A little bit, yeah. Navini for sure. I've worked with a lot of folks.
Those are different, you know.
Former Navini folks.
You know, those are different things of, you know, driving acquisitions and business decisions.
Sure.
You know, Meraki was part of the big acquisitions at that time.
And so you were involved in these various acquisitions that Cisco did over the years during that whole
in the wireless
your
space.
time in the wireless space. Okay, yeah. After I mentioned I worked at Wavelink, I went and worked at Cisco at the Richardson campus in Texas.
Oh yeah, yep.
And a lot of the people I was working with were former Navini engineers. Too bad WiMAX really didn't go.
I think WiMAX is one of those stories where, you know, it had a little bit of a lead on LTE.
Yeah.
And you know, unfortunately, it did not take advantage of that lead.
Yeah.
It was kind of an Intel-backed adventure.
Yeah. Well, it's the telco's fault, right?
No, I would say that people misunderstood that. I think Intel had such success with Wi-Fi. I'm not sure they fully appreciate the difference between licensed and unlicensed. It's one thing to put Wi-Fi into a laptop. It's a little bit harder to putting cellular into a laptop.
Sure, yeah, for sure. Well, if you had to boil everything, all of your Cisco time, what would you say was like, when you look back on those years, like that your crowning achievement there, what you're most proud of during that time that you were at Cisco?
Yeah, there's a couple, as I said, at Cisco I had fun doing the whole Passpoint open roaming.
Okay.
This was kind of the vision of, hey, let's make Wi-Fi, you know, as easy, connected, secure as cellular. That initiative is still happening. Slowly, we're starting to see open roaming. This is the convergence of Wi-Fi and cellular. How do we make it easy for people to move between these two networks? I would say the other fun one was Cognio. This I remember. I don't know if you remember Clean Air.
Yeah.
This is basically putting a spectrum analyzer. You know, hey, let's build spectrum analyzers right into the AP, so we don't have to lug spectrum analyzers out.
Which now everybody does in the enterprise space.
Yeah, I don't think anyone does it well, actually. I think Clean Air was still kind of one of those things. It was a hard, you know, that was a silicon play. That was actually having to go down to the silicon and add stuff. So that was a relatively hard play. I mean, I think the Meraki acquisition is probably the other one I worked on that was probably made sense. That was kind of the beginning of the, you know, recognizing yes, cloud is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
You know, and leveraging that.
So I'm sure that then, you know, you talked about the CMX location. You talked about you were involved in the Meraki acquisition. All of these different projects that you were working on at Cisco seems to, when you made the move to leave Cisco and then form Mist, if you look back at what you were involved with at Cisco, it makes there's a lot of like, you carried on with some of those ideas, it seems like, when you started Mist. Would you say that's accurate? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the general story is, when I was at Cisco, I was doing the CMX stuff, and I started talking to big enterprise customers, and they started telling me, hey Bob, your controllers are crashing too often. I was trying to convince them to put like an application onto the network, like something business critical or something.
Yeah.
Up to then, Wi-Fi had gone from a nice to have to a must have, but it wasn't quite business critical. People were not trusting it to run robots and stuff and
Sure.
put customer apps on. And so they started telling me, it's like, hey, before we put something on the phone that our customers, you got to stop your controllers from crashing. The other thing is they wanted to make sure that, 2 releases a year, they were moving, their app development was moving, releases every week or every month or so. So they wanted the network to be able to keep up with all their app development. And then probably the third and biggest thing was, they wanted to know for sure that, hey, if someone connects to that network, they're gonna have a good experience. And that's when I kind of realized, okay, there's a paradigm shift. It's one thing to keep all these things green, right? AP, switch route, yeah, we got to keep all these things up and running and green, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that the user is having a good experience. And so that was the beginnings of the AI. I mean,
right.
You could definitely see cloud, and Rocky has shown this, guys, cloud is a much better way to develop and maintain software, because I can do releases every week now.
Sure.
So okay, you don't have to wait a year to get something new into the software or fix anything, right? Problem, we can fix it. So the cloud took care of how fast we could actually move. The AI is what really took care of the day 2 operations. Now I really don't care what the problem is. We're sitting on top of this network trying to figure out why is the user having a bad experience, and that could be my box, someone else's box. At that point, you're somewhat vendor agnostic.
Okay. Well, before we now dive into Mist, so how involved were you in the development of radio resource management, RM?
That's what I did at Aerospace.
Okay, so that was another one of your babies, so to speak.
That was one of my babies at Aerospace, and I would say the biggest change that's happened with RRM is 20 years ago, we were really building algorithms that were trying to minimize the energy between APs. What's going on with RRM nowadays is reinforcement learning. It's more about trying to optimize the user connection. So that's the subtle difference between, trying to minimize energy between APs to, okay, guys, we're really going to try to optimize the symmetrical link. We're going to try to make sure that we get this network to the point where, we keep symmetry between the links. Because for people who've been in the wireless space, some of the biggest problem is, AP can, client can hear AP, but AP can't hear client.
Exactly.
And how all kinds of problems.
Yeah, that was a regular discussion I had with several customers when I was at Theatro. Is, they say, well, we leave everything up to RRM to take care of all of the, transit power levels and channels, and they don't tune it. It's just default. You have to always explain the concept of, well, when it's working, it's the APs, how they hear each other. That's how they then determine what transit powers to use. But that, the clients are down here on the floor, right, in between the aisles of whatever retail store. And so like you said, it's a very different perspective. So it's nice to see how RRM has kind of evolved from just the APs listening to each other and making those decisions to where now they're focusing on the clients who are actually connecting to the APs and how their experience is.
Well, that was the biggest, between the Aerospace and the Mist adventure, Aerospace is more about, let's keep track of the AP, and we're sending data back to controllers every minute or so. In this new world, it's more about, if we're doing synchronous data, but there's also asynchronous data. Every time the user state changes, you're keeping an eye on every individual user on the network.
Yeah. Now
that's more data, but you get more visibility down to, and that's why RRM is changing, right? It's not about AP to AP more. It's about how do you make sure that AP to user link is optimized.
Sure. All right. So now you've moved on from Cisco. You decided to start a new company, go back to the whole world of startups, and now it seems like you really get to dive deep into what you've always seems to have been excited about, which is AI. I mean, if you look at RRM, and Cisco CMX. Those types of things, from my understanding, have a lot of similar components to them, to what we understand as like AI today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would tell you even before all these technologies, through the adventure, the one thing I learned from the Metricon Ricochet is make sure you have high IQ executive team.
Okay.
One thing I learned through the aerospace adventure was, execution. You have to have a solid team. So what I've ultimately learned is that, for any startup is the ultimate, I'm famous now, startups are the ultimate team sport.
Sure. Yeah, I've heard you say that before.
Yeah, and so this is like, so MIST was kind of the ultimate, okay guys, let's go build a team. Not so much about, you got to get technology working, but you got to make sure you have a team that can execute.
Definitely, yeah. And so you guys now, you formed MIST. You started focusing on not just good Wi-Fi or an AP that would provide good Wi-Fi, but an AP that can make intelligent decisions on how it's going to interact with clients.
I wouldn't say it wasn't so much the AP. It was like, the reason, we built an access point at MIST, wasn't so much because we want to be in the access point business. It was because it was the source of data, right? If we're going to do this AI ops thing, that is the ultimate source of truth. I didn't trust Cisco and Aruba to just play nice and give me the data I needed. So I wanted to be able to control that data source.
Sure.
It's not so much I needed another access point. I just need to be able to make sure we control the data being sent back.
So then in order to do what you wanted to do with AI, you needed to create a data capturing device, basically. And so you decided, let's do the AP because that's where we're going to get the information that's going to help allow us to do what we want to do over here with the AI and machine learning.
This was the paradigm shift to, yes, we have to manage the AP and keep it green, keep it up and running, but the bigger picture is how do we keep track of the end-to-end, user, cloud, have all the stuff in between. Now it turns out that the access point is a great place, if you're trying to answer the question of why are you having a bad experience, the edge of the network doesn't have all the answers, but it has 80% of what you want to know.
Sure.
What's going on on that wireless link. And it has a little bit of information of what's going on in the LAN link. Right.
Okay. So you're at MIST now. You've got your access point, your data collector. You're developing the AI component of that.
Gotta get the cloud built first. We didn't do AI for 2 years.
So you had the AP in the cloud. You had to get all that working together before you can focus on the AI.
It took 2 years to get. Because you have to go build all these real-time pipelines. Right, and that was probably the biggest difference between when I knew when we did the Meraki thing. Meraki definitely showed the power of the cloud. Guys, this simplifies management, simplifies development, and all that stuff. But if you want to do AI ops, you got to build a whole set of pipelines, and that took a year or two to go get all the cloud infrastructure built to do that.
Okay, so you can get the data that you need to then feed the AI.
You gotta get the data back.
Algorithm. Gotcha.
Yeah. We spent probably the other big thing is, to me is we spent probably organizationally, we tied the data science team right to the customer support team. Right? And if you think about it, it took probably another year to figure out what data we needed to get out of the, when you watch the support team SSHing into the devices, your goal is to stop all SSHing.
Sure.
And getting that data, guys, if we're going to solve this problem, first of all, I got to make sure the data is in the cloud, not in the AP. And that's probably the other paradigm shift that, and what you find out is most customers, the same data that your AI engine wants is usually the same data the IT guy wants.
Yeah.
Because usually the IT guy doesn't trust AI anyway. He's like, just give me the data, I'll take care of this myself.
I'll take care of it. I'm much smarter than the AI.
Well, it's like, I don't trust that guy. Who knows what that AI thing's doing?
Exactly. Well, that makes sense because now you want to know what are the actual experts doing to solve problem X, Y, and Z, and kind of monitoring what was going on with your tech support teams. You quickly learn what are the most common issues, and what's being done then to identify the issue, to resolve the issue, and how often do those issues come back, things like that. I mean, that all seems to be very helpful to understand.
You think
how to
about it,
use
right? AI is basically this. AI is just the next step in the evolution of automation, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You know, I mean, ultimately, we're trying to do something that normally would require a human to do, right? And so when you find out, I mean, that human is that IT domain expert who's ever solving the problem, right? You know, and you're trying to figure out, you know, how we're going to automate what your customer support team does on a daily basis.
Sure. Yeah. And make it happen, you know, almost immediately when the problem arises versus waiting for someone to complain about
you know the old
problem.
story, right? I mean, you're at Cisco, customer calls up, says something's broken. Your first response is, send me the log files.
Yeah.
That usually
Yeah.
takes a day or two. It's like, you guys, you know, all that
And
paradigm's gone.
It took the customer several days before they decided this is bad enough to complain about.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, nowadays we're getting to the point where, you know,
Yeah.
you know, if a radio needs to be RMA, you know, you just send an email to the guy and say, sorry, we see you have a bad radio.
And you can do it proactively, which I think every
You
time
don't
that
have to-
happens, I'm always shocked when a company reaches out to me proactively and says, hey, I noticed this,
Yeah.
or we noticed this, we're going to take care of it. Wow, these guys are taking care of me. You know,
Yeah.
that's a fun experience to go through, definitely. All right, so you've got now your Mist, your AP, your cloud controller, so to speak. You have the AI accessing all this data and learning from it. And how long before, once you got all of that going, did Juniper come knock on your door?
Well, let's see, we started the company in 2014. We got acquired in 2019. So
Okay.
that's like
5 years?
5 years, 4 to 5 years. And so they knocked, and I would say, you know, that was a thing in time. You know, Juniper didn't have a wireless play, so they were looking for a wireless play. We were at the phase of the company where, you know, we're going to have to go raise money, hire a sales team, probably have to build a switch, you know, which always leads to dilution. So we were at that right point in time. Juniper needed a solution. We needed a sales team. Either we have to build one or join one.
Sure.
And then, you know, that was the exact same story at Airspace. You know, you always get to that point in the adventure where, okay, you know, we got to scale the business, and it becomes a marketing sales story.
So were you guys, when you were Mist, were you being pursued by other companies outside of Juniper, or was it just really just Juniper?
I think it's no big secret. I mean, Cisco was a investor.
But they decided not to.
You have to talk to Cisco. Cisco had the first right of refusal.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it makes sense if they were an early investor in what you were doing, that they would have that.
I think
that
Cisco had a lot of moving pieces back then.
Yeah.
They were going through leadership transitions, and you know, they already had 2 wireless plays, and I don't think they really saw us. You know, I don't think they really appreciated the fact that we were more of an AI ops story than a. Yes, we have wireless, but the bigger story was really around the day 2 AI.
Well, and I think you guys were still telling that story of AI. It was still kind of early enough that a lot of us in the industry didn't really comprehend what AI can do.
I think there's still a lot of people here at the show who still have very skeptical of this whole AI stuff.
I would agree. So Meraki, or Cisco has Meraki, and Meraki's at the time still today doing really well for Cisco. And so yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense if they only looked at Mist as just another cloud-based, Wi-Fi vendor. We already have Meraki.
Yeah, we already had a cloud AI story.
But it seems like Juniper has been a good fit for you guys at Mist.
It's been a very good matchup, right? You know, we don't have overlapping product conflicts at Juniper, and so I think, you know.
And weren't they looking at doing something similar with AI on their whole wired LAN side with their switches and routing and things like that? Weren't they kind of getting into that at the same time they looked at you guys?
I I'll be careful. I would say they were making self-driving noises, but there was no
execution.
No execution behind.
Sure.
That's back to the. I'm always a fan. You guys, marketing should not be more than a couple months ahead of execution.
Yeah, that would be
marketing
nice.
Gets,
that would be nice. Well, that's great. So now you're part of Juniper. You're still doing very interesting things. You're still helping our industry evolve and go in the directions that are, I think, most impactful for us in the wireless industry. And that's one thing I noticed as I started reading more about you and your career. You seem to always have been the one pushing the next big thing in the wireless space and the Wi-Fi space. You kind of pushed initially the idea of controllers. Maybe you weren't the only ones, but you were, one of the
players in the game.
People pushing the hardest on let's go from autonomous APs to controller-based wireless network. And then the whole idea of, we talked about radio resource management. Let's put some intelligence in the access point so they can kind of tune themselves. You were at the forefront of that, it seems like. And then cloud-based kind of controller, when you were kind of involved, but you were involved in the acquisition of Meraki.
I recognized Meraki early on. It's like, hey guys, this is going to be a better way of managing these devices.
Right, and now everyone has a cloud-based management solution, it seems like.
I think everyone has one. Some of them are better.
Yes.
You find out, I would tell you, people don't really appreciate the fact that the cloud is really a software architectural change. A lot of people, I think, start with they're going to take their controller code and then try to containerize it and stick it in something.
In the cloud, right.
Put it in the cloud, which is really not how it works.
Sure, it's not that simple. It's straightforward.
Yeah, and so you'll realize that you have to really start with a blank sheet of paper, and that's one reason why I left Cisco, because as I said, Cisco was kind of an architectural, as I said before, leaving, aerospace was an emerging technology play. Mist was a architectural change. So when jumping off the cliff at Cisco, you're going up against Cisco and Aruba. You're not going to beat these big guys with a feature.
Right.
It has to be something more fundamental, and that was the bet on cloud and AI.
Right. But I look at that. I guess what I was getting at, like you said, it has to be something fundamental. And so if you look back at going from autonomous to controller-based Wi-Fi, that was a fundamental shift.
That was another fundamental architectural
everybody
change.
Followed, right? And then when you look at, and you weren't the first ones to do cloud-based, but you recognize Meraki as a significant, fundamental change from your on-prem controller hardware to cloud-based. And so you kind of pushed that along, and now everyone has a cloud-based management solution and AI, and now it seems like everyone's again following Bob Friday, and doing more with AI and implementing AI in a way that's going to help make their product and their solutions more effective. So you've been when you look back at all of this, it's got to be very satisfying to say, I've pushed some of these key fundamental changes in the industry that I work in.
Well, I have to admit, life has been pretty good in the scheme of things, being at the right place and taking advantage of opportunities. But I usually tell people is you create opportunities, but you still have to take advantage and execute on them.
That's true.
So
you have to execute.
It's one thing to recognize them, it's another thing to actually do something about it. I would say from a career point of view, going from blank sheet of paper to leader in Gartner MQ in 5 or 6 years, even for me, was unexpected. It's usually, you just don't start from scratch and crawl your way up to the top of the pile.
You always seem to be able to strike when the iron's hot. The timing has always seemed to really work well for each of those fundamental shifts. At least when I look back, I've been, doing this for 20 years, and I've gone through those fundamental shifts, right? That seems to oftentimes point or come from Bob Friday.
Yeah, well, Yes, like I said, I'm sure there's people listening right now going, I recognize that too. I saw it happening too.
Right.
The difference is you got to actually do.
You do.
You got to.
Timing's one thing, and then implementation is another thing, right? Execution,
like,
exactly.
If I hadn't jumped off the cliff, it's, in hindsight, leaving Cisco seems like a brilliant move. Back then, it wasn't so obvious.
Scary, I'm sure.
It was like, hey, you guys, believe me, there was plenty of people telling me, what the hell are you doing, Bob? There's no, the world does not need another wireless company.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned jumping off the cliff, and you, throughout several moments in your career, have made that jump. So are there any other jumps ahead of you, or was it probably your last jump?
Yeah, at this phase of the adventure, I don't know how many jumps. I would say, in the scheme of, if you look at industries, architectures change every 10 years or so. So I mean, I think we went from autonomous to controller. Now we know kind of cloud AI is probably the next big architectural change coming to networking. It's hard to tell. It's probably going to be another 10 years before we see what is the next big architectural change going to be in networking.
So while Bob Friday may not have another jump ahead of him,
there's a whole new generation here at WLPC.
Absolutely. I'm
figuring
hoping,
it out.
But what do you think then, whether you're going to be one of the ones to push it or not, what do you think might be this next fundamental change that might impact what we do today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm keeping a close eye on private 5G. I think we'll talk about it a little bit tomorrow. It's like, there's been the Wi-Fi world, the cellular world. If you look what's happening with connectivity, typically people don't care how they're connected, whether
Sure.
it's cellular. I just want my phone. It seems like there's room to be improved there. There's really some dynamics going on in the industry that kept these two worlds apart. Mm-hmm. You even see it here, right? This is the world of Wi-Fi at WLPC.
Right.
There's a whole nother world of GSMA, all about cellular and 3GPP.
So do you think that those two technologies are going to kind of continue to come together and just maybe one day
I think we're going to watch
be the same?
As I'm saying, if you look at the early days of Wi-Fi, it was kind of a nice to have. It wasn't a must have.
Right.
We're selling to conference rooms and everything. It wasn't, like I said, the catalyst for that was Intel, and that took Wi-Fi from a nice to have to a must have.
And the iPhone, the whole consumer side of
The
things.
whole consumer side. Now we're seeing the same thing with kind of this private cellular, right? It's kind of a nice to have. The question is there a catalyst that's going to make private cellular on par with Wi-Fi? We're going to start to see private cellular beside all our Wi-Fi networks here. Yeah,
that'll be interesting to see because there is a lot of increasing talk about CBRS, private 5G, and you're right. I mean, right now there's a lot of talk about it, but tomorrow we might start seeing those things start playing better together and just kind of becoming.
There's hurdles, right? I mean, the spectrum regulators have got to make the one thing with Wi-Fi, we have global spectrum regulations that make it a global thing. If they get over that hurdle, figure out how to get some sort of private cellular spectrum available globally, that would be another big thing.
Yeah, that's kind of, I see that not just in 5G and Wi-Fi, but I think, other things, like LoRaWAN or maybe Halo or some other,
but they've all been niche-y. They haven't ever become.
But I can see as IoT becomes more of a thing and just the whole idea of wireless connectivity, I can see a day where people don't know if their device is connecting via some kind of cellular or Wi-Fi or LoRaWANs or similar. People aren't going to know. It's just going to be, it's all wireless connectivity, and I can see a day where it all kind of seems to meld together.
Yeah, that's why I'm still a big fan of open roaming.
Sure.
It's like, you guys, are we ever going to get these two worlds to, where they just seamlessly authenticate, keep you connected, make the right decision?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think there's still a lot of excitement ahead of us, and if you decide you have another jump ahead of you, I think we'll all be interested in knowing
Probably wine tasting.
I've heard that about you. I've heard that you make your own wine. Is that right?
I make 1 barrel of wine a year.
All right.
That may be the next adventure. Turns out, winemaking is an organic chemistry problem, and it turns out organic chemistry is actually harder than wireless. I thought wireless was hard until I start worrying, trying to figure out this organic chemistry problem.
All right, so I guess we'll have to keep our eyes open then for the Bob Friday
Organic
label
chemistry,
wine.
yeah.
All right.
AI,
Excellent.
bring AI
to making wine, chemistry. Yeah. All right, well, great. Well, thanks again for joining me today. I kind of grabbed you last minute, and I appreciate your flexibility and just
It's always fun.
saying yes.
Come to wireless, indoor location, AI ops, any of that type of stuff.
Excellent.
It's always fun discussion.
All right, well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Todd.